Hi, I'm Jess Fields. Welcome to the show. The other day, I interviewed former Harris County Judge Ed Emmett. Now, for those of you not from Texas, a county judge in Texas is basically the county executive. And Harris County is one of the biggest of them all, the third largest in the country with about 5 million residents. Houston only comprises about half of the population. Emmett was in office for 11 years, from 2007 to 2018, and he led the county through two major disasters. Hurricane Ike in 2008, the sixth costliest hurricane on record, and then, of course, 2017's Hurricane Harvey. Harvey is the second costliest U.S. hurricane on record. Prior to that, Emmett spent about a decade as a state representative. He was on the Interstate Commerce Commission back when that existed in the early 1990s, and he's been now a professor at Rice University. He is an expert on emergency management, and we talked about how emergency management should look for local officials, especially in a crisis like this, what he thinks of the current emergency management status of most of our localities and local governments, and how leadership influences these crises like the coronavirus pandemic. I think you'll enjoy this interview with former Harris County Judge Ed Emmett. All right, so Judge Emmett, thank you for joining me today. And let's start out with a very basic question. A county judge is not a judicial position, is it?
Not in Texas. It's a total misnomer, but it's a historical title. County judge anywhere else would be called county executive, except even that's not exactly right. The county judge and the 4 county commissioners collectively set policy for the county. But the county judge is sort of the chief administrative officer of the county. But in recent years, county judge has become important because after 9/11, the Texas legislature looked up and said, there needs to be one person in each county that's responsible for handling emergencies. Most people think of mayors, but Harris County has 34 cities.
Wow, okay.
Houston's the largest, but even Houston is less than half the population of the entire county. So you need somebody to make those decisions. So the role of county judge changed dramatically after 9/11, and ironically, it was set up following that terrorist attack. But the main role in Harris County has been dealing with hurricanes and floods, natural disasters like that.
So let's go straight to that, Judge, because that really that was the core of your tenure, and you became not only a regionally well-known, but also nationally well-known because you led the county and the area through several major crises. So as the chief executive of the third largest county in the country, how does somebody in that position, or anybody in today's world with the coronavirus, with all the other crises that maybe are facing our nation and localities, how do you process information that's burgeoning about a crisis? You know, whether it's a virus that's starting to come into Washington, New York, or in your case, you had a hurricane that slammed into Corpus Christi and then started to turn north, but nobody knew that it would become Hurricane Harvey and stall out. How do you separate those pieces of information as things are starting to emerge?
Well, first and foremost, you build on experiences that have gone before you. When I came in as county judge, Robert Eccles had been the county judge for, 12 years, something like that, a little over 12 years. And he had dealt with Katrina, even though it went in New Orleans, but we had the evacuees come over from Houston. And then he had to deal with Rita 3 weeks after Katrina. So there were a lot of lessons learned about sheltering. And in the case of Rita, the lesson learned was about evacuation, namely that a lot of people should not evacuate. So as long as you build on what's there, and then he started, and I have to give a lot of credit to Judge Eccles, because he started really the Office of Emergency Management, the Emergency Operations Center that we have. And it is the finest in the entire country now, because after Ike, we were able to upgrade it even more. So you have a team of professionals, and you have to trust them. In the case of a hurricane, I never thought I would say this, but hurricanes are easy. You start planning 120 hours out. from when the winds hit the shore. You evacuate and you figure out where the storm surge is going to hit. You evacuate those people. You tell everybody else to stay where they are, hunker down, shelter in place, whatever the term is. And then you ride out the storm. COVID-19, which we'll get to in a minute, how long are we going to have to ride it out? I mean, it's a whole different thing. Harvey was so much worse than a hurricane too, because we didn't know where it was going to flood. At least in a hurricane, you know the storm surge is coming in. They don't have a lot of rain with them. Harvey was the remnants of a hurricane, and it gave us the largest rainfall in North American history.
So at what point in that process, Judge, do you sit down with your team as new information is coming in and say, hey guys, this may really be something, whatever the crisis is, whatever the situation is. I mean, you probably had numerous times during your tenure that even weren't hurricanes, just things coming down the pipeline at you. And how do you kind of have that conversation with your folks?
Well, we have the conversation all the time during hurricane season, for example. And Hurricane Ike, as it turned out, Mark Sloan, who is the emergency management coordinator appointed by me, and I we were actually at the White House. We were receiving an award for some things Harris County had done.
Wow.
And as we're sitting at Reagan National Airport, we're watching what became Ike. And he said, I have a really bad feeling about this. And sure enough, within a week, we were dealing with Hurricane Ike. In the case of Harvey went down in the Corpus Rockport area. We heaved a sigh of relief, but the meteorologist that works for Harris County, Jeff Lindner, came in and he said, you know what? People to the west of us might get as much as 50 inches of rain. And we had just gone through, if you remember, Tax Day and Memorial Day floods where we had 12, 16, 20 inches of rain. Those were really bad. So when he said 50, our initial reaction was, well, I'm glad we're not them. And then he came in a little while later and said, yeah, we better get ready because it may come to us. And of course it did. So surrounding yourself with experts who know what they're doing, that's what you have to do.
So you're sitting in the airport and the conversation comes up, this may be this may be something, this Ike, which I guess at that time was probably tropical depression or tropical storm Ike, some wave, and turns out to be the 6th costliest hurricane in U.S. history. And of course, just one of a few major such disasters that you dealt with. But that's interesting. We will come back to that. But how are all these similar? I mean, whatever the situation, even with the coronavirus, and people would say, well, that's different than a hurricane. But I think that a lot of these share some similarities, don't they?
Sure. And, in partial advertisement, not only am I at Rice University, but I'm also affiliated with the Global Resilience Institute at Northeastern University in Boston. And worldwide, we deal with disasters all the time. Mm-hmm. And what you have to do is have an organization in place, and you have to empower people to deal with whatever comes their way. Anytime you're caught off guard and you don't have somebody that's empowered to deal with it, then you're going to have a problem. But in our case, we're set up. We've had some, I'll be gentle, we've had some glitches here lately with regard to COVID-19, mm-hmm. deciding who should be empowered and who should be doing what. But that goes with the territory.
Well, so kind of on that, Judge, how is COVID-19 different than other crises? What makes it unique?
The biggest difference, let me go back to Harvey. One of the problems, we have contracts in place for debris removal, for example, following hurricanes. Well, normally we get a hurricane, we activate those contracts, the trucks come from all over the country and they help us. But in the case of Harvey, a week later maybe, we had a hurricane in Florida. And suddenly the trucks that could come here could also go to Florida. And Florida was paying more money for debris removal than Texas. So we had to scramble around and make that work. COVID-19 is that on steroids because the entire country is having to deal with it.
Right.
So it's not like we can reach out to some other part of the country and bring help in because we're all dealing with it. And that's the part that makes it so different.
So how do you take those organs of emergency management that are created for really response for almost anything, and what do they do differently in this kind of a crisis?
The main thing they do in any crisis is they establish partnerships that they work with.
Okay.
In the case of hurricanes, we always had a great working relationship with the medical community in terms of shelters. When Harvey came, the Harris County Medical Society helped us with the shelter that we had set up at NRG Center. Well, those relationships with the medical community obviously are key now. So
Right.
in addition to them, then we're able to bring other resources, the nonprofit world, in to help ameliorate the problems that we're having. But this is a big problem to try and handle.
So you mentioned those relationships and the fact that this is a national problem. How do the partners, how do these medical suppliers and people like this, how can local officials and communities struggle to get the attention of these folks when you have Governor Cuomo on, his press conferences saying he's going to go in and seize ventilators. He's doing everything he can. And of course, every other governor, mayor is trying to do the same thing. How do you win the priority battle? Because everyone is affected.
Well, everyone is affected, but not everyone is affected equally. Uh, Mayor Turner said it yesterday, and he was right. We don't have a shortage of hospital beds in the Houston area. We still have lots of extra hospital beds.
Right.
That makes us different. We have plenty of ventilators. We have plenty of ICU units. So we're blessed here. But we do have, the world's greatest medical center right here.
Yeah.
And
right.
so that's important to note. And one of my frustrations is I read headlines that say something like, well, the latest headline that bothered me was grocery store workers are dying of coronavirus.
Right.
It's in the Houston paper, but it's about Brooklyn, New York. So people here get scared because, oh my gosh, grocery workers are dying. Well, they're not dying here.
Right.
And in fact, the death total in the city of Houston to this point is 10. 10. So maybe that's because we did a lot of good things. Maybe it's talking about social distancing, the way we live here.
Right.
Practice social distancing on a regular basis. We're spread out.
People are more spread out in Houston. So that prompts another question, Judge. How do you think that the current media environment is fueling the panic? Because of course you have the virus as a health crisis, and you kind of have this secondary effect, right, of the effect from the panic and people going out and buying all the toilet paper in the stores and things like that. I mean, is that all media? Is that some of that reasonable? What's the breakdown there?
Well, a lot of it is media, but not all of it. In fact, we see it every time a hurricane comes. People go panic buy.
Sure.
And no matter how many times I would say, look, hurricane's going to come and go. It's only going to be here for 3 days. Just have enough food and water in case you lose power. But otherwise, you don't need to do that. Hurricanes, like I said, they're simple compared to something that goes on week after week after week. But the media, no matter where you are politically, I teach a class at Rice, and one of the things I do is I'll have them watch MSNBC for 30 minutes and Fox News for 30 minutes.
Right.
And it's like you're on two different planets.
Oh, sure.
So how do you know what you're getting is accurate? And we're in a political year. I'll go a little off the subject here, but Hurricane Andrew in 1992 was really the first political hurricane. President George H.W. Bush got beat up because of the lack of response for Andrew. But prior to that, nobody expected the President of the United States to deal with a hurricane.
Oh, really? Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, no. If you think back to Carla or Alicia or any of the others, it's just something you did. I was in the legislature when Alicia came across Kingwood, which you know well.
Sure.
My son came in to breakfast and said, "Y'all know we have a tree in my room?" We didn't know that. But the neighbors went around. We kind of took care of it, dealt with the insurance.
Right.
It wasn't FEMA was here, but it wasn't nobody looked to the federal government to save them. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but now we're in a different world. It happens to be a presidential election year, and so everything is just magnified that much more.
So in some respect, is it maybe a little bit unfair to expect massive action from the federal government during these kinds of crises? I mean, is it really up to local officials and state officials to provide that response?
Well, it has to be on in the first instance anyway. The federal government has always been, they come in after the fact and help pay for things. And we have a set process when there's a declared emergency where we can start spending money, local governments, knowing that it's going to be reimbursed by the federal government. You can't expect, we're not going to have warehouses crammed full of all possible things that might be needed in an emergency. We just can't do that. So, of course, and I'll be the first to say, I mean, President Trump's not the most articulate spokesperson. I mean, my guess is President Reagan would have done a better job of explaining and calming people. But, he has his strong points and his weak points. But the federal government, by and large, I think is doing what they can do right now.
Let me pivot off of that to something that makes me think of, which is that the White House has largely deferred to the CDC and this director, Dr. Fauci. And then you see a lot of local officials also deferring to health experts primarily, maybe instead of emergency management staff. So is there any unintended consequence to that, you think?
Yeah.
Is that, or is that the right response?
I'm going to be very careful with the way I offer this.
Sure.
Once it became an emergency, whether it was a hurricane or health emergency or wildfire, you need to turn it over to the emergency management people to handle.
Sure.
Yes, the healthcare professionals are the ones that need to be in on the decision making.
Right.
They're not the ones that are used to responding to emergencies. And if I have one complaint locally, it's that we took too long to get the emergency management people with remember all those partnerships I talked about.
Right.
Being able to bring in the nonprofits, being able to mobilize forces. That's who has to do it. And the healthcare professionals were involved early trying to contain the virus.
Right.
But once it became an emergency, then it needs to turn over to another group. Healthcare needs to take care of healthcare. Emergency management needs to handle the emergency.
So these really, in a lot of ways, are questions of leadership. And that prompts me to ask, what leadership qualities are necessary for somebody, whether they're the mayor of a small town or, county executive of a multi-million person county in Southeast Texas? I mean, wherever someone is, what do local officials need to keep in mind during these kinds of situations?
First, it's something that you can't plan for. You have to be trusted. The public has to look at you and say, okay, we trust what this person says. If you don't have that, you're going to have a problem. And we're seeing some of that at the national level right now. The people who did not like President Trump going in aren't going to like what he has to say.
Right.
Whereas, and I hate to go back to it, but even people who didn't necessarily like the politics of Ronald Reagan,
right,
they liked him.
Right.
He was comforting.
Sure.
And I know that's ancient history for people like you, but nevertheless, it's a good thing. The other thing is you have to, it's not about you as an elected official. You have to make it about the people you're talking to. And in that regard, give them as much information as possible and let experts talk to them. Like whenever we had hurricanes coming, I give you my favorite example. Uh, Early on, we had several little hurricanes that came our way before we got Hurricane Ike.
Mm-hmm.
And Jeff Lindner, the meteorologist that became very well known here, he would brief somebody who would brief somebody who would then brief me, and I'd go talk. I did that one time. And then I went back to everybody. I said, why am I doing this? Why do we have Jeff out here doing this?
Right.
And so having him out there is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at the national level, the president's trying to do that some with Fauci.
Mm-hmm.
And it probably works. But share whatever information you can that makes the public feel safe. But whatever you do not give them any false information.
Mm-hmm.
And if you accidentally give false information, correct it and apologize immediately. Don't try and cover it up and keep moving. They can forgive your mistake. And then the other thing is, I used to tell my staff all the time, if you remember during Hurricane Ike, Mayor White and I did all the press conferences jointly, side by side. We alternated who went first. I mean, don't let your ego get in the way.
Right. And for those who aren't aware, Bill White, at the time mayor of Houston, a Democrat, you, county judge, Harris County, a Republican, and yet able to still work together and kind of put aside those differences. I mean, how important is that in a crisis? Just to say, you know what, let's not talk about this, red versus blue thing. I mean,
it's critical because emergencies typically don't have a partisan bent to them.
Right.
You need to get through it. And the other thing you have to do to be an effective leader is once you've empowered people, let them do their job. Don't try and micromanage every little thing during a crisis, and don't get into the finger pointing game. Sometimes things are going to go wrong. And I remember during Ike, something went wrong. I had one reporter who kept asking me over and over and over, whose fault was it? And I said, I don't care whose fault it is. We'll figure that out after we get through the crisis. Right now, we have to get past this hurricane. And then, the question even went away after that.
So I definitely want to ask you about the hurricanes. I lived that history. But I have to ask you, because you brought something else out too here with kind of the public disclosure aspect of it, and also the question of, Governor Cuomo obviously, has, I think, previously maybe been a fairly partisan figure, although now latest thing I saw is like 80% of New Yorkers are approving of what he's done. And he has these conferences every day, and he starts out with, here's how many people died. I mean, what is he doing right that people can learn from during this?
Well, number one, he's giving facts.
Mm-hmm.
He's coming across as calm. He's not pointing fingers. And he just, part of it's just personality. I mean, he's just coming across as somebody that seems to be trying to solve the problem.
Right, right.
And, if you think back to Mayor de Blasio, he couldn't have gotten off to a worse start. Because, he was out there saying, hey, everybody, it's fine.
Right.
The very same thing some people are blaming President Trump with, who didn't really do that.
Right.
But he was trying to be optimistic. De Blasio said, no, we're fine. You just, go out, go to Chinatown, eat dinner, have a good time. Well, New York's paying the price for that now.
Yeah, that's a great contrast. I mean, you have two New York Democrats who at various times I think have butted heads, apparently. And I'm not a big observer of New York politics, but they did. They had very different responses, and people have responded to them very differently. I mean, in that way, it seems like maybe what people expect is just the truth. They just want to be told, here's the facts. I mean, here's kind of what's, the reality. I mean, it's not nice for anybody to come and say, well, here's how many people have died, and that's more than yesterday, and it's going to get worse. But I suppose that is maybe what people are admiring about what the governor's response is, and not just Governor Cuomo. There's other leaders too. He's got the most national profile right now on this thing, but it could be someone different in a month or two.
Well, and he has the national profile because New York's got the worst situation.
Sure, of course.
You know, that's an issue.
Sure. And I've noticed, I think the president maybe is taking a little bit of the same tack. I mean, he certainly is, his warnings are growing a little bit more dire, and he's getting a little bit more out there with, here's how this is going to be bad. And I think the other day they specifically said you'll have maybe a couple 100,000 deaths from this. And that certainly is a little bit of a different tune than before.
Yeah. And no matter how you say it, too many people have wanted to say, well, compared to the flu, for example.
Sure, right.
And those are all true statements,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't help.
Right.
Because the difference is you can take a flu vaccine,
Right.
we flu shots. And yeah, more people will probably still die from the flu this year than die from COVID-19. But if we hadn't taken all these steps, who knows what the number would have been. And I think, I hate to say this, but what's going on in New York, I think is, oh gosh, it's a tragedy, but it's also a reminder that this could have been really, really bad throughout the country if every area had the New York style situation.
So I think that leads to the question of, was this preventable? Could we have stopped this entire thing? Or was it just inevitable that with a virus that spreads as easily as this one does, that it's going to happen kind of like this?
No, I don't think with our current technology and our current knowledge, we could have stopped it. No more than, look what's going on in not just Italy, but France and Germany and the UK.
Sure.
The Prime Minister of the UK got it.
Right, right.
All over. And we're not even hearing about some of the poorer countries because they're not reporting. And of course, I'll be blunt. I don't believe the numbers that China gives anyway.
Oh, I don't know that anybody does.
I mean, they're saying they only had 80,000 cases.
Right.
We know that's not true. So, no, I don't think we could have stopped it. I do think there could have been improvements in containment.
Sure.
And here locally, one of my complaints, when it turned out that the second person to test positive was a researcher at Rice.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. And Rice University, in some people's eyes, jumped the gun. They immediately quarantined that researcher and the 14 people she'd been in contact with and shut down the building that they were in. And I started asking the question, who is this person? Well, it turns out she was on the same Nile River cruise as the first person that had been tested positive in Fort Bend County. And it took a week to get that information out to people.
Wow.
When in reality, that should have gone out first. And then what was really irritating about, and this is where it was the health, Dr. Shaw, I will name names, Dr. Shaw with Harris County Health made the decision, we don't want to violate the privacy.
Right.
Well, the problem with that, this person, and I say it lightheartedly, when you come back from an international trip, there are a couple things you're going to do in Texas. You're going to go to the grocery store and you're going to go eat Mexican food.
That's true.
Yeah. So where did this person go before she ever came back to work at Rice?
Oh, wow.
And then it turns out that the Harris County Health knew that she had taken communion on Ash Wednesday at St. Cecilia Catholic Church, and they weren't going to tell anybody about that.
Oh, wow.
And so
this is really something. Is this all public information about this? I mean, but I don't guess the dots have really been connected maybe publicly. I haven't read all of this in one place. So here's an individual, who this person is, obviously, and the second case in the Houston area. And then basically the health management folks said, hey, we're just not going to release all this information when, she was around a variety of different people after coming back from this cruise.
And that's the kind of information you need to get out.
That's extraordinary. So how much I've noticed that if you go on the website for most of the counties or the cities that are tracking the information nationally, there's really very little identifying information. I mean, you can't even find out where a person's neighborhood is. So it's kind of like the only people you know who've had this have either died from it or they are famous people maybe that have decided to share on Twitter, like Tom Hanks. Hey, I've got it. You know, he and his wife Rita were diagnosed while they were in Australia, I think. Why is that? I mean, is there a concern about people's, the stigma associated with this? Is that a legitimate concern, or should we know? I mean,
I think we should know more than we do. The HIPAA laws,
sure,
you know, prevent identifying people, but that doesn't prevent you from saying there was a positive tested coronavirus case at St. Cecilia's Catholic Church taking communion.
Right.
You, public needs to know that.
Sure.
And one of my favorites, though, a woman in Liberty County, where I am now.
So just east of Houston. So
yeah, kind of northeast,
yeah,
east of Houston. She tested positive. She went on Facebook and said exactly where she had been, to the best of her recollection, for the 2 weeks before.
Wow.
And you know, while that's scary, what a good thing to do, because then you can
right.
say, well, you know, I was in the Walmart and I did this and I did that. But information is good.
Yeah. I mean, I found myself recently, the few times I've gone to the store or something, tried not to go out, but you wonder, are you around people that are infected? I mean, now I think you've heard it said a couple of times by federal officials and some state officials in different places. They said, don't even go to the grocery store. I mean, is that what we should be saying to people, or is it, I mean, it would seem like, folks need supplies. Not everybody has weeks and weeks of food on hand or can afford that. I mean,
well, and then, you have some people who, we've been buying our groceries and make an appointment and you drive up and they put it in the back of your car.
Right. Sure.
Not everybody can do that.
Yeah. And
then not everybody can take off work.
Right. Yeah, it's tough. So I want to talk about these hurricanes because I lived through both of these, and in the case of Harvey, like many other people, people close to me, people in my family lost their homes, lost most of what they owned. I lost tens of thousands of dollars of personal property in Harvey, and then went through the very difficult process of trying to, maybe apply for some kind of benefit, and I ultimately just gave up. It was difficult. That wasn't a local process, but when you're dealing with these situations, I guess in the moment, do you just pretty much put every other piece of business on the table to the side and say, look, we're just going to focus on this? I mean, or do you just continue to run everything? I mean, because you've got so many different services, any local official, any state official, so many things on the docket. How do you prioritize a crisis like that?
Well, in the case of being county judge, it's actually remarkably easy because the county judge is the voice of the county. So, and as by statute, is the director of emergency management for the county. It's your main job.
Right.
So, yeah, you deal with it. But again, I can't say it often enough. Hurricanes have a fixed time.
Right.
And then you recover, and the recovery may take a long time. And you mentioned Harvey. One of the problems that Harris County has had in the city of Houston, they weren't able to spend the money that the federal government gave them in a timely fashion. And that's not unusual.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in fact, I will make a prediction. Mm-hmm. The state of Texas will come in and take away the Harvey money and spend it directly to try, because there have only been like 9 houses repaired or something like it, some ridiculously
really
low. And so, yeah, and Harris County fired the person that was in charge of it, and they put somebody else in. The city of Houston hadn't been able to make it work. And one of my real worries right now, we passed this $2.5 billion bond issue, and got with 86% of the vote, which was really remarkable. I'm afraid the COVID-19 emergency is going to just push Harvey completely off the stage, and
Right.
people are never going to get the money and the restoration that they deserve.
So you're talking about the local bond, and then you're saying they're going to reappropriate the money for.
No, they can't reappropriate the local bond. That was for mitigation. That was for building flood mitigation projects. But there were literally billions of dollars sent by the federal government that was supposed to be spent to help people rebuild their houses and their businesses. And the city and the county had done such a poor job of getting that money out.
Right.
That the state was going to come take it over. I think they still will, but I think it's going to be hard to get any additional money now for Harvey victims, simply because COVID-19 victims, it's affected so many more people, and so many people have lost their jobs.
So the federal government just passed this $2 trillion stimulus bill, and the government's going to send checks to everybody, or everybody up to a certain income level, and there's all these other things associated with it. And I guess a lot of people are hoping that federal dollars are going to kind of save the day, but you've had a lot of experience with these federal dollars, and you're just commenting on this. Is that the right approach, or how do you view those federal dollars actually affecting what's going on the ground?
Well, whenever there's a crisis, Congress and the administration, no matter who they are going to try and throw money at it.
Right.
And what has happened with Ike, with Harvey,
and Harvey, right?
I guarantee it's going to happen again. The money, you throw it into this big tube, and it's got a big funnel on the top of the tube, and in the bottom it's this little tiny opening, and it takes forever to get it out.
Right.
That's just going to continue to be an issue. But let me point out something that's come to my attention that I think, and in fact, I talked to Congressman Crenshaw about it. Mm-hmm. People think that if you make over a certain amount, you don't get any money from this. Right. That's not true. If you're on Social Security, mm-hmm. everybody who gets a Social Security check is going to get a $1,200 check.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That means me. I don't need $1,200. I didn't lose my job. I didn't have a business damage. My wife's going to get $1,200 because we're both of an age that we're on Social Security. People living in the River Oaks section drawing Social Security are going to get $1,200.
Houston. So what you're saying is that politically it was advertised as a certain thing, but then the reality is that the money's going out to kind of everybody that receives Social Security, which is pretty much everyone, and then maybe the impact that was desired, or the rhetoric, it doesn't really match up with the results.
Well, they had to do it quickly, and they couldn't figure out a way to figure out who on Social Security deserved it and who didn't.
Right.
And so they just said, this is an easy group to get money to. So what I want to do, and I hope everybody will start talking about it, is if you don't need the $1,200, let's organize something that finds a way to give it to somebody who does need it.
Great idea.
I mean, and in fact, this is probably an awful thing to say. I've got a lot more money in my account now than I was. I was supposed to be in Florence 3 weeks ago during spring break. So I got all my money back from this Florence trip I was supposed to take. We were supposed to take a cruise this summer. I got all my money back,
Good timing that you didn't get stuck over there.
Yeah, if I'd been a week earlier, I'd have been in big trouble.
Oh, my goodness.
But I know why Congress passed the Social Security part of it.
Right.
Because many people on Social Security, that's what they live on.
Right.
I got that. But there ought to be a way for, and maybe they do it when we file our income tax returns. Maybe we ought to have to declare the $1,200 and ship it back if you made over a certain amount.
That's interesting. So I guess if somebody's watching, listening, and they want to give their $1,200 away to somebody, it sounds like the Emmett family is going to be taking that tack.
Yeah, that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. So in terms of the funnel, I love that analogy. You pour everything in the top and then a tiny little spigot on the bottom. With hurricane relief, that is a direct matter. The federal dollars get passed and then they get poured in. Supposedly they're going to go and help the local level, and very, very little. I mean, how much realistically, I mean, what are the figures on that as far as, this amount was supposed to go, say, to Harvey relief, and then maybe this is what actually went there? Because I think everybody's pretty familiar with Hurricane Harvey. It dominated the news cycle for weeks. So it's a pretty recent national tragedy that everybody's kind of aware of. So what was the figures that you figured out on that?
Well, let me go back to Ike. It's an easier one to talk about.
Sure. Okay.
Anytime you have a hurricane, the recovery involves HUD money for housing. It involves SBA money coming in for small businesses. It involves individual assistance. The entire amount of money went in right after Hurricane Ike in 2008. Harris County got its final check from the federal government in 2018.
Oh, wow. 10 years later.
10 years later.
That's incredible.
And I doubt if Harris County has spent all the money yet. So there were people that were damaged in Hurricane Ike.
Wow.
Now 12 years ago that probably still haven't gotten their money. And then a lot of people like you in Harvey just, okay, we just throw up our hands. Well, we're just going to move on.
Yeah.
But Harvey, the money's a bigger amount. And that's why the city and the county both had, for a variety of reasons, had dropped the ball. And so that's why I think the state's going to try and figure out how to do it. But I don't know that the state's going to be any better at distributing the money. It sounds odd. It's just hard to give away a lot of money.
Right.
Your way.
Well, officials want to just throw money at these issues, right? I mean, it's understandable. That's one thing you can do is let's pass a thing and give more money to the problem. And
the federal government has certain buckets they can put money in and get it out quickly. Social Security, the example I just gave. But the other one, the SNAP program, we used to call them, food vouchers.
Food stamps.
Food stamps. Well, after a disaster, it's DSNAP, Disaster Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. The idea is for those who have been damaged by a storm and are not on SNAP, then they should be temporarily eligible for SNAP. Well, when Harris County did it, it was set up by Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. And when all the accounting was done, we had given out these, I'll use the term vouchers, that's not what they were, but vouchers to over 1 million people. That's almost a quarter of the population of Harris County.
Yeah, that's a lot of, I mean, that's there's probably not more than 2.5 million adults in Harris County, I would guess.
I mean, and, we had, I think it was 160,000 homes damaged, which is a lot.
Sure.
But that doesn't add up to 1 million.
Right.
And a lot of those people were already on SNAP, so they weren't eligible for DSNAP. So, and I'm not begrudging people the money. I'm just saying that the federal government has certain programs that have been in existence.
Sure.
Whenever there's a disaster, they say, well, let's throw the money in that bucket. It's easy to get rid of it that way.
Well, I think that it's reasonable to say that the assistance should maybe go primarily to the people that really need it. And that kind of brings up something else, Judge, is a lot of people are talking about the possibility of civil unrest in all of this. And the idea that with grocery stores empty, maybe food supplies starting to wane, and you see that in some areas there's long lines of folks to get government food assistance, and the food banks are really being strained. And there's a lot of stories about that. And I think I saw something in New York that stores are boarding up, and they're fearful of this. I mean, is that ever really a concern in something like this, or does it just kind of get overblown as part of the run-up to the crisis?
I think in this case, it won't happen.
Okay.
And I think the reason is the public understands the reality. no matter where you are. I mean, I'm out here in rural Liberty County.
Sure.
We jokingly go to the shopping mall once in a while. That's
Hmm.
the Dollar General store.
Right. Right.
And people in there are doing the social distance. I mean, I think everybody understands. No, this is the real thing, and so and we haven't had the great shortages. Yeah, we're short of a few things.
Right.
Toilet paper, which don't ask me to explain why people hoard toilet paper. Never makes any sense, but it's just what they do. Um, so, but I don't think we're experiencing great shortages, and we'll get through this one pretty easily.
Sure. Well, so what's the difference then between like, so you go back to Hurricane Katrina, which obviously was in New Orleans, and it certainly was not something you presided over, but you took over in Harris County not long after that. I mean, in Katrina, you really did have civil unrest. You really did have people looting stores and things like this. What's the difference? Because I think that is what people are fearful of with the COVID-19. They're afraid that, at some point, all these unemployed people are going to go out. They're going to be hungry. They're going to have no choice maybe but to break into stores. Why don't you think that will materialize?
Well, I can go back to Hurricane Ike. Uh, we were without power some parts for 3 weeks.
That's true. Yes.
Everybody was terrified that there was going to be looting.
Hmm.
There was not a single incident of looting
Really?
in
Wow.
Harris County.
Hmm.
And in fact, one of my favorite stories that I talked about at a State of the County speech, there was an Asian store owner in the Sunnyside section of town, which is a largely poor, largely African American section.
Sure.
And he was so scared that he didn't have a burglar alarm, didn't have power, that he slept in his store. And he talked about the second or third night, he hears a banging on the front door in the middle of the night. And he goes, oh no, here it is. And he goes to the door and he cracks it open. And there are three pretty tough looking teenagers,
Hmm.
staring him down. And they told him to go home, that they would guard his store.
Wow.
And they did. You know,
That's amazing.
yeah, those are the kind of stories we need to get out. That's
Right.
why I introduced him at the State of the County, and I said, "Here's a story you probably don't hear because it doesn't make the national news."
Right.
Uh, New Orleans was just a special case. I mean, you got to remember they were looting big screen TVs. They weren't looting food
Well,
necessarily.
that's true. Yeah. Yeah.
What are you going to do with a big screen TV?
Well, and now everybody can buy their own with their $1,200 assistant check, right? So we can all buy our flat screen TV if we want to. That is a great story, and I mean, people that watch this may not be aware. Houston is one of the most, and Harris County, one of the most diverse areas, probably in the world. It's just, I mean, it's so many different kinds of people, and everyone gets along very well here. You had, I think, the Indian Prime Minister not too long ago came down, gave a big speech, and 50,000 people showed up, and President Trump was there because we have one of the largest populations of Indians
Yep.
outside of India. So it certainly is special in that way. I hope that everywhere else does have the same positive atmosphere of let's help each other out and everything. And you see these little stories, and it sounds like your take would be those are isolated, that you don't think this is going to result in mass unrest. I
No,
hope.
I really don't. I think because everybody knows that this is a national crisis, that they're not. There's no one group that is feeling particularly picked upon or abused.
So with the hurricanes and everything else, what's the biggest takeaway that you had personally? I mean, in terms of your own preparation for your family, you've got those kids and grandkids and people and probably everyone is asking you after these hurricanes, what do I need to do when hurricane season comes? Or how do I get prepared, right? I'm sure you've probably gotten that question thousands of times. So what do you tell people? I mean, how have you personally changed your habits or have you since dealing with some of these things?
Well, the hurricanes, I used to tell people when I had the platform to tell them from, uh, hurricanes in our area, treat it like the winter in Minnesota.
Mm.
You know the ice storm's going to come. You have to weatherize your house. You have to do certain things to get ready for the winter.
Right.
In Houston and in our area, we should always do all the things necessary, assuming that a hurricane is going to hit us. If it doesn't, no harm, no foul. But that way you're ready. It's hard to get people to do that because they don't know. And that's why you see when a hurricane gets in the Gulf, people are lined up at gas stations and the
Sure.
stores and all that. But I think enough people have come to realize the dangers of hurricane season that they do pay attention.
And so people in this area or people in Minnesota, or I was talking to a friend earlier who's in rural Nebraska and has worked in public policy in Nebraska. And he was telling me, sometimes they have a winter storm so bad, people may go a month, month and a half without being able to leave where they are because the snow is so deep in Nebraska. So it sounds like if you're prepared for really any of these crises, then you're prepared for something like coronavirus or anything that might come down, the pipeline, because you've taken the time to think about, okay, what am I going to do if I have to bug out for a few weeks in my house? And it sounds like that's just really good advice, generally speaking, for anything.
Yeah, it is because, we don't know what the disasters. I go back to how we started this conversation.
Sure.
County judge was put in charge because of a terrorist attack in New York.
Right.
Turns out that being in charge of emergencies meant dealing with hurricanes. Then it meant dealing with floods that weren't even hurricanes, but they were just floods. Now we're having to deal with a healthcare crisis. Maybe when the locusts come and the other,
right.
Who knows what's going to be the next one.
Well, is there anything you would do differently with any of those events that you managed through? I mean, the hurricanes or anything else? Or
well, you learn in every event.
Right.
Lesson learned in Ike. We all, when a hurricane comes, we lock ourselves in the emergency operations center. We work for 5 or 6 days nonstop. And then the storm's over. Then somebody has to handle the recovery. And we're all exhausted. So after Ike, I created a whole second team so that whoever handled the storm itself went home and the new team came in and they were responsible for the recovery part of it.
Right.
So, you learn those kind of things. But really the best lesson I learned was find good people, put them in the right position and give them the authority to act. In a county of our size. And if you're in a small rural county, then maybe the county judge can do it all, but you can't do that in an urban county like ours. Got to remember, Harris County has more people than 26 states.
Right. How many people are in Harris County?
Close to 5 million.
Close to 5 million. I mean, that's a huge area, but it sounds like if you're prepared and you put the right people in place and you give them the authority to do their job, and people kind of have a collective attitude. Everybody kind of has an attitude of, okay, we're going to, kind of get through this. We're going to get through it together. We're going to do certain basic things, whether it's preparing with food or whatever for a hurricane or social distancing. If you take these basic steps, what it sounds like you're saying is that at the end of the day, we're all going to be okay.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
And we always have to remember, it's not about you, it's about other people. And after Harvey, the reason I became so passionate about the bond issue and said this is now job one is, if you remember, we had been locked in for 6, 7 days. It was awful. And my youngest daughter had arranged with a church to give away shoes that were going to be shipped overseas, but we needed them here because everybody was mucking out their houses from the flood. So they set up some folding tables to give away these shoes in the neighborhood. She asked me if I would come over, and I said, sure. So I showered, and I'm happy because this whole thing's over. And as I turned onto her street, I was greeted with just the mounds of debris on both sides, if you remember that following.
Oh, absolutely. I could never forget that. It was
8-10 feet high.
Right.
And I was talking to our lobbyist in Austin, and I said, you're going to have to give me a minute. I mean, it was just kind of took my breath away.
Right.
Yeah, I've been doing this for a long time, but So I pulled over to the curb and I was fine. And I saw an elderly couple come walking out of their house. And I noticed they weren't carrying anything. They got to the pile and they just started sorting through it. And it was at that point it hit me. Those were not piles of debris. Those were people's lives that were out there on that curb. Mm. And so every official needs to always understand that the decisions we make, those are people's lives. I mean, it's easy to have statistics, but you got to remember it's their lives. And so if as long as you remember that, then I think dealing with emergencies, I won't say it's easier, but it certainly puts it in perspective.
Yeah, that's a powerful takeaway. I'll never forget going into my my mother's neighborhood in Kingwood and seeing those the piles of debris on either side of the street. Like you said, 8-10 feet high. I mean, that's not an exaggeration. It was horrific, and a lot of people are still trying to recover even today. 2.5 years later, but there's been some time, there's been some policies since then, and yeah, a lot of people have moved on, and I guess we'll all move on eventually from this. It will take a toll. We're not through with this yet, but hopefully we'll be able to move on. And is there anything else that you wanted to say pertaining to this, or anything else, Judge?
No, I think people got used to hurricanes. We've had some wildfires. This was the first health crisis like this, particularly for people younger than me.
Right.
See, I remember polio and
yes.
the terror of people who, particularly in the summer, mm-hmm. Some people weren't allowed to go swimming with everybody because nobody knew where the polio came from.
Wow.
And that got solved. And since then, we've kind of forgotten about it. Well, coronavirus has given us a whole new thing to worry about. And so now we'll start looking at healthcare.
Yes. Well, thank you, Judge. Thank you for coming on.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Best of luck with your Rice classes, which have all moved online, as we all have. So,
and I've learned to actually enjoy them.
Well, that's awesome, and we're all getting used to this new reality. Judge Ed Emmett, thank you very much. Appreciate you joining us. And that was former Harris County Judge Ed Emmett. If you like this program, please subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/JessFields. We are on Spotify, Stitcher, and now Apple Podcasts as well. The program continues to grow, and we appreciate you very much.